Hi and welcome back. It's that time of year, we're approaching the holiday season, and so this is the first of a few demonstrations that we'll be doing that hopefully will inspire you to make some holiday or Yuletide or Christmas cards. Today I'm painting inspired by this beautiful photograph here from Pixabay. And I'm going to be painting it in a very loose style, sort of in the style of Ron Ranson, so suggesting detail rather than overtly painting it. I'm starting off using Millford watercolour paper. It's a 1/4 imperial sheet, which is 11 inches by 15 inches or 28 centimetres by 38 centimetres. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape. It isn't pre-stretched. I don't pre-stretch my paper. I find that it buckles a bit as I paint, but the tape holds it fast, and as it dries flat. When I paint, I have my board at an angle of about 45 degrees, and then gravity will help me with the painting, as I usually paint wet in wet. So today I'm going to use a large Pro Art Ron Ranson Harkey brush, and you can use any wash brush to wet the sky area and bring some of that water over the land, so I get a soft transition between the sky and the land itself. And you can see that I've lightly sketched out in pencil just the simple shape of my hills. And if you look carefully at the painting, you'll see that in my foreground and midground, I've left some dry patches of paper. And this means that when I put some of the sky wash across the snow for some reflected light, I can keep some areas white, which will give me some lovely natural highlights. Now this is a mixture of cerulean blue and indigo, quite watery, so I think I need to add a little bit more paint to it, because watercolour always dries quite a lot lighter, and I want that beautiful, intense, early morning glow of a perfect blue sky just as the sun's coming up. I've just got a little drop of water across the top, so I'm going to try and mend that. Just quickly, before anything dries out, put a slightly stronger bit of paint across the sky, and I think that's going to be okay. And I'll just clean up with a tissue carefully along the tape in case there are any drops of water. I don't want them to run down because that sky is looking nice and even at the moment. You can see that I brought my paint down over the top of my hill, and that will give me a lovely soft transition between the sky and the land. I'm just going to put in some Paynes grey and burnt umber, something and nothing, into the foreground, just to sort of signify, I don't know, footprints, dents in the snow, somewhere where some little grasses are going to be poking through, and just a little bit of shadow. And that shadow and texture in the foreground will suggest, rather than being detailed, and it will also help to balance out the composition once I get my trees in. You can see where I left the page dry across the foreground that the washes are resisting. They're not flowing into those areas, so I'm getting some sort of white areas as well as the blue areas, and the different shades of blue are giving me some nice sort of shadows. I'm just going to try and sort of get in a sort of a hint of directionality for this path here that's going to be coming down the edge of this group of trees. Now with a size 2 Da Vinci synthetic round brush or quill brush, I'm using quite strong, rich, almost tube consistency paint in Paynes grey and burnt umber with a little bit of the cerulean blue added to it. And you can see that because this is a richer, drier mix of paint, my trees are staying on the damp sky wash, but they're still softening out and blending and diffusing a little bit, but the paint's not running down off the page. It's staying where I put it, but it's blending and gently softening. So this kind of loose watercolour painting is inspired by the late great Ron Ranson and other advocates of this kind of very loose impressionistic style of watercolour, where these marks eventually will come together, and even though they sort of really messy sort of scruffy marks, they'll end up hopefully looking like trees on the hillside, or just growing up behind the top of the hill. So I'm keeping it paler for these distant trees that are sort of further back in the painting. Now I've just left the trees to dry a little bit, but they're still damp, and now I'm using the corner of a piece of chopped up plastic store card, or you could use your fingernail, the end of a paintbrush or a palette knife, and I'm scratching through the paint, and it's revealing these nice impressionistic scratches to suggest the light hitting the trunks and a few branches. And that's just helped to define those trees a little bit more. And now I'm just going to go in and drop a bit more dark shadow colour into these trees, just across the very base. And that change in tone helps to add form and shape to the trees. I'm making sure that I paint around the scrapes and scratched trunks and branches, but I'm getting those shadows in. And then with a flat brush, it's a 3/4 inch flat brush, just dragging a little bit of that paint in sort of gentle horizontal marks, and that gives me a little bit of shadow on the snow. Not too much, but just enough to give a sort of an impression, and that adds to the depth and distance. And then I can go back in as this paint is even drier now, this rich paint here, and you can see I'm scraping back to the white of the paper, and that's pulling out just a little bit more light and shape and form in these loose trees. And I'm now going to leave it all to dry off completely, and then come back once it's dry and finish off the painting. So here it is, it's all nice and dry. The shadows dry back quite a lot lighter, so I'm going to firstly darken up some of that shadow beneath the trees with another glaze of Paynes grey, with a little tiny bit of burnt umber added to it. But you can see that this time it's layering up and it's going in quite dark. Again, working between those lighter tree trunk scrapes and scratches, and that helps to add depth and distance, and the tone balances out that area so that it emphasises that kind of the very dark trees and the sunlight, as it's just sort of creating that beautiful misty sort of sunrise over the snow. And you can see where those really nice soft transitions between the sky and the top of the hill really helps to increase that effect. I'm sorry about the light here, again, because it's quite low winter light here through my windows, and I only paint in natural light. It's kind of bleaching out the blue a little bit. And then just a little bit more work on the shadows underneath those trees, adding a little bit of blue to those brownish shadows. And then I shall add a few darks, just suggestions and just little brush marks, something and nothing across the foreground. I don't want any detail there. I just want the foreground to lead the eye up across the snow and up to the trees. I'm going to use a sword liner just to put in a few very slender grasses poking out of the snow here and there, and I think that's going to be just enough detail in the foreground for this loose, simple painting. So just keeping it nice and simple, a nice beginner-friendly tutorial that beginners or intermediates could really enjoy doing, I hope. And As I say, I think this could make quite a nice Christmas card if you made it on a smaller scale, or if you paint it larger, and then you could print out smaller copies and make your Christmas cards with that. So I think that's going to be just about it for the foreground. But I think I'm just going to dip into my paint water, maybe with a tiny bit of the grey on it, and I'm going to fill in very carefully around the trees this mountain going behind the trees. Quite faint, so it just needs to be this transparent glaze onto the dry sky. So you just see that little bit of mountain behind the trees, and I can go in and just finish off and bring a few of those sort of looser, ragged foliage edges out a little bit further beyond the mountain. This is using a small calligraphy brush. So I think I'm just about done now. You could add some birds if you wanted to. You could add a little bit more detail in the foreground. Maybe a fence across that sort of tree-edged hill. But I'm going to remove the tape and have a look at it with a clean white border and see how it looks. The little white edge is quite nice because it helps us to see the painting sort of with fresh eyes, almost as if it was framed. And here it is on a cleaner board. And I like the freshness of this. I really like the gentle, soft blue on the snow. But I think my favourite part is the trees. I think the trees work really nicely here. I like the depth underneath the canopies, the depth, the shadows, the tones balance it out really nicely. And it's a little bit brighter than it shows here. I'll show you a slightly better photograph. Here's that photograph which shows you that lovely cerulean blue for the sky that's just been brought down and given that sort of sunrise depth and glow by adding a little bit of indigo to it. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please leave us a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. We've got more than 75,000 subscribers now, which is incredible. I'm absolutely amazed. So thank you so much for subscribing. And thank you so much to my wonderful Patreon group who support this channel. And I'll see you again soon. And happy painting. Bye.